I remember stumbling back into my dorm, flipping the lights on. I'm just completely soaked in blood.
This is We Bleed Orange and Black, the podcast for Halloween and horror lovers. Join us as we interview creators, discuss our favorite horrors, and share original spooky stories. I'm Jeff C. Carter, and this week we're talking with Caleb Stevens, the author of If Only a Heart and Other Tales of Terror. Caleb Stevens is a dark fiction author from somewhere deep in the Colorado mountains. His stories have appeared in numerous publications and podcasts, including the No Sleep podcast, Tales to Terrify, and many more. When he's not writing, he can be found horsing around with his daughters or playing guitar. Welcome to the show, Caleb.
Thank you so much for having me, Jeff. I appreciate it.
Can you tell us a bit about your origin story, where you grew up?
Yeah, I grew up in Cortez, Colorado. People may be familiar with Mesa Verde. It's right by the Four Corners. Grew up there in a very small town. I think we had maybe 9,000 people there at the time. And then moved to the Front Range to go to school at Colorado State University and wound up in the fabulous world of accounting after that.
Nice. What got you into horror?
I had a really strong passion for reading as a young child, and it's something I can really thank my parents for. And I really started out in fantasy, and I read a lot of the classics. I mean, one of my first books was The Hobbit, and from there, obviously, the Lord of the Rings. And my dad was constantly feeding me books. The Sword of Shannara. I think it was Alan Dean Foster. He had a series called the Spell Singer series with singing animals and magical instruments and things of that nature. So just reading and jumping into different genres. And I read more in the sci-fi and fantasy genres than I did in horror. And I think it's actually more horror film that got me into books, actually, the horror genre itself. When I started watching movies like It and dipping my toes in with, of course, some Stephen King. And really, I still think it's my favorite book, but I read Cormac McCarthy's The Road.
Okay.
It's just such a beautiful book, and it's so realistic, right? And I like the horror genre because I feel like with most genres, you can sort of predict the ending, right? And I feel like with horror, it's the one genre where anything is up for grabs. You know, it could be a good ending, it could be a bad ending. It's a lot like life.
That's really interesting because most people might think that fantasy would be the genre where literally anything can happen. But as anyone who's tried to create fantasy knows, you actually have to set some base level reality and some ground rules, or else it all starts to feel very mushy. But there are certain tropes, especially heroic journeys, things like that, that if you don't pay them off in a fantasy, you would disappoint the audience. Whereas horror is perhaps unique amongst the genres in that you do not have to deliver a particular through line or deliver on a particular expectation, because horror is a mood, not a collection of tropes. Whereas the fantasy, the Western, the romance, there are certain beats that have to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't put it any better. You really nailed it with the hero's journey too, where we all love the hero's journey. It's human, right? As far as horror goes, like you said, it's a feeling, it's a tone, it's based on characters. There's just so many ways to color with horror, right? And you can really color outside of the lines. I think that has really what's attracted me, because it's allowed me to sort of open up my brain as far as story ideas go, because nothing's really off limits. Although I do try to stick to the typical 3-act structure when I'm working with novels and that type of thing. But for the most part, it's just the fun aspect of the fact that, anything's game, really. And just a fun aside too. I say I got pulled into horror through movies, but my wife, when I first met her, I knew I met my right match, because our first date was to the first Saw movie.
Oh,
and I think every year it was like our anniversary to go to the next Saw movie at the theater. I think we made it through Saw 7 or something like that. So.
Wow. I could see you getting ready to pop the question.
Hello. Do you want to play a game?
That's right.
That's awesome. So how'd you make the jump from being a horror fan to being a horror writer?
I always felt this pull to, as I'm sure a lot of authors do when you read enough, it sort of gets into your bones. And I just wanted to create. And I had this pull at a young age when I was coming out of college. Took a stab at a couple stories, and of course, took a stab at a novel that I think I made it, I don't know, 30 pages in. And then the real world sort of smacked me upside the head, and jobs and all of that good stuff. But I always had this tug and this pull to get back to writing. And as I continued to, read, I got more into horror actually with my reading. And I think somewhere around 28 or 29, I kind of looked back at this decade that I spent 10 years or so working in public accounting and auditing, and sort of, the death of the soul in a lot of the ways. It's long hours. It's, a lot of times 80-hour work weeks. And I just said, I'm not necessarily leaving any type of legacy behind here. It's not my passion. I enjoy my career to an extent, and it's provided a lot of opportunity, and very thankful for my career. But that said, I felt led into more of a creative pursuit. And so I wrote my first novel, and I think it took me from start to finish, in between, having twins.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So you won't be surprised when I say it took me about 4 or 5 years. And then I sat down and I read the thing. And Jeff, it was just heartbreaking, because I just knew it didn't work at that point in time. It was that sort of walk across the coals book. And I remember driving to pick up my kids, just feeling gutted. What did I just spend the last 5 years doing? My wife's uncle actually wrote the screenplay for Jumanji, among a lot of different movies. And he confirmed that it wasn't really working for a variety of reasons, which led me into the pursuit of craft and reading every craft book I could get my hand on. And from that point, I got into several writing groups over time. And once I started writing more in horror and that genre, I felt like my writing opened up some, and it just started to come a little more naturally. So that was a really long-winded, roundabout way of answering that question.
No, it's actually crystal clear. And I hope one day you can look back and see that first failed novel as the cornerstone of your career that led you to pursue craft and colleagues and advice that propelled you forward instead of some millstone around your neck.
That's a fantastic point. And I think I'm starting to see that. And I think that it's unfortunate that a lot of authors, I do think they write that book, right? But then they don't push on. And that's what it is. It's just like your failed attempt at writing, instead of, like you just put it, the cornerstone that's pushing you onward. And I had that moment. I probably spent, I don't know, a couple months groveling, but I just loved writing so much and reading that I just had to get back to it. When you're writing, and for anybody in an artistic pursuit, you sort of get into that flow state where the problems go away and you're in the moment. And that's really hard for me to be in the moment. I do struggle with anxiety. I'm a type A personality, and I'm always planning. And when I'm writing, I'm actually there and I'm present. It's like I just had to get back to it. So it's in my bones at this point.
It sounds like the other half of your personality, if you're working 80 hours a week doing CPA work, and no doubt there's a ton of planning and strategizing with your daughters, being able to slip into something that's more of a flow state and just be creative sounds like you kind of found your missing piece. And that's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. I know you wrote the 31 short tales of horror with We Bleed Orange and Black. Do you feel like you get into that flow state when you write?
It depends. I will spend an embarrassingly long amount of time researching and plotting out a story that's only ends up being a page long. Once I'm in it and I have a beat sheet or an outline that I feel like works, and I am going to commit myself to writing these longer chapters that are more character driven, then it definitely feels more like I'm just on a ride.
Absolutely. That's where you want to be.
This brings us all quite succinctly to your collection, If Only a Heart and Other Tales of Terror. And a little birdie told me that this was just nominated for a preliminary Stoker in the fiction collection category. Congrats.
Yeah, I was blown away by that. It was sort of this really hazy goal of mine to at least make the preliminary Stoker list, but there's just so many good writers who wind up on the recommended reading list. And I'm very thankful for that. It's great. It's sort of a milestone, right? Like, it's showing me that I'm on the right path. And I have no illusions of making it any further. If I were to make the next cut, I would be a quote unquote, Bram Stoker nominated author, which would be more than I can imagine. But just making it this far has been great. So thank you so much.
A common piece of advice with writing is start late and leave early. And I feel like you start post-traumatic and end tragically.
That's a good summary.
Your stories are like these emotional drive-bys. Were they written as a collection? Is this just the end result of several years of writing short stories?
Funny enough, going back to that first novel, I didn't have it in me to just bang out the second novel. As I was going through the craft books, I also realized that I had a lot to learn and wanted to spend more time sort of practicing with the short form. And I never wanted to write short stories. I mean, it was always something that was a vague interest of mine, but I didn't realize how much they teach you and how fun they are actually once you start doing them. And it's great, right? It's like the first date with no commitment. You can have a great time and move on if it's not the right person. And with my shorts, I noticed that over time, I started getting better and I started getting feedback. And it's sort of a quick iterative pattern as to improvement. And I got to the point where I just started writing short stories no matter what. I reached a point where, not to go too far off the path, but I'm formally agented. And with my second book, I actually took that on submission with that agent on a couple rounds, and it got really close and it made it to a couple of acquisition boards. And I had editors who were really, championing it. They couldn't get it across the finish line. And that process took, another 2 or 3 years. And I sat there at the end of that one and sort of feeling gutted, thinking, I've got to get something out into the world. I've been writing for, at that point, 10 years or 8 years. But I realized I have to just get it out there. Nobody knows who I am. I've been writing all these years and I still haven't gotten my stuff out. So I decided to put together the collection. And one of the biggest helps was being in a Discord writing group where I had access to a lot of other authors. I tried to do everything alone for way too long. I had folks who could help me with the editing. I had folks who could help me with the cover design. I had folks who could help me with the marketing and how to actually get it on, draft to digital and get it onto Ingram Spark and Amazon and all the stuff that just seems insurmountable if you haven't done this on your own before. And I had the help of an indie publisher with that book as well. And so that's really how it all came together is I had a group of stories I wanted to put out. And surprisingly, subconsciously, as I was writing, I did realize that I had a theme through all these stories. And I did pick out stories that I thought worked well together. And it's themes that I didn't even realize I was doing in these individual stories until I read it sort of as a broader work.
So many of your characters are physically and or mentally broken. What inspires you to chop off that beginning to the bloody quick like that?
I think a short answer is that I really want to thrust somebody into the experience as fast as possible with a short story. I really want to hook them. I really want to put them into a place where they can sort of sympathize with the character and wonder how they got there, how they're going to get out. There's just not a lot of time to work with short stories, in my opinion.
There are some dates sprinkled throughout the book. It seems like there's a timeline hidden and there's some lore behind some of these stories. Was this all planned out, or was this another aspect that you discovered after you had written these stories?
I'm glad that you actually picked up on that. Nobody else has mentioned that yet, but there's nothing too deep in answer with that one. I wrote a 1980s themed story for the Dread Machines anthology that came out. It was called Mixtape 1986. It's a fabulous anthology if you haven't read it. But in the meantime, I also had a couple other period pieces. So I thought, hey, I could kind of riff off this 1986 and I could make, the Western 1886. I could make medieval 1586 and just see if anybody picked up on that. It's just 86 and there's really no rhyme or reason for it other than I just wanted some sort of synchronicity there. So.
And yet, in the oldest story, The Crowing, that has more fantastical elements to it, it does read like an origin of these monstrous beings that you've dubbed the Otherlings. And I've noticed that throughout the other stories, by and large, the creatures that feed on grief and that kind of lure people into these emotional traps all share similar characteristics.
Absolutely. And it's really interesting, I think, to have people read your works and then kind of tell you what they see in your works. And now that you say that, to me, that's crystal clear. And that's absolutely the majority of the monsters that are in the book. That's a theme that I hadn't yet unearthed. So thank you for that.
I thought I was on the trail and I was picking up all the clues you were putting down.
Well, I grew up with a lot of extended family tragedy. I think we had around like 11 sort of tragic deaths as a kid. By the time I left my house to go to college, and that just worked into my psyche. And so I think there was a long time where I was afraid to go, get on an airplane or go skiing or even drive anywhere or leave my house. And I think that grief sort of saturated me a little bit. And so I think that has, in effect, worked into a lot of these monsters. So you are picking up on what I've subconsciously written for sure.
My favorite story in the collection is Don't Let Her In. It's about a girl riding down the highway with her mother, and there's things left unsaid. There's a lot of tension there. They're both dealing with the loss of a grandmother, and then boom, they run into an elk, and it's horrifying, but they're both okay until the elk gets up and turns into their departed grandmother. Whatever this thing is that's trying to get at them is wearing the faces of their lost loved ones and playing on their grief and their loss. What were you thinking when you positioned grief in this way, when you personified it like this? There always seems to be a characterization of grief in your stories that seems to be tempting the characters or trying to lure them in.
Our biggest fears are often not monsters or the things that jump out of us or, heights, snakes, spiders. Yeah, those are scary, but you got to go deeper to really dig into people's fears. And for me personally, having gone through what I did growing up, as well as having a family now, it's loss. It's loss of people who I love. It's injury to people who I love. Horror writers in general, there is a little something broken with us in a good way, I guess, but we'll explore those things. And why do I put myself into that position? I don't know, except for the fact that I think it's somewhat cathartic. So I think the scariest creature that I can imagine would be one on the road that would be a personification of somebody or something that you love, that you've lost, who is trying to use the love that you have for them for sort of an evil intent. The other answer to your other point there is that specifically with like the Wallpaper Man, which offers a child a way to get back at those who have wronged him. The moral there that I was trying to relay is that you never want to give in to your darkest desires. There is a consequence to that.
You've had a lot of success with some of these stories getting picked up in podcast adaptations and reprinted in other markets. Your story has also been adapted to film by Amit Gupta.
He sent me an email that said, "Hey, have you ever thought about turning this into a film?" And I immediately was dialing my parents and saying, "Hey, we're going to have a full feature film here. And I don't have to do anything else anymore. I can just work on, writing and movies." And of course, that's not the way things went. Fast forward 4 or 5 years, we finally got to the point where after multiple script iterations and going between full feature film scripts and short scripts and trying to figure out which way we wanted to go, decided that we needed to do what's called a proof of concept. Really, it's more of an ad to sell a feature film, which is what the Wallpaper Man is.
Don't you touch her.
I can help it. Give me its name.
It was a great experience. Got to fly out in January of last year and just watched it film for the day, and just a ton of fun. They had all kinds of, equipment on set that I can't name. I think they had like $250,000 cameras there, and it was wild. It was surreal to be there watching my story become, a film, something that I'd imagined. Something I'd never expected would happen, which is why I often tell folks, you just got to get your stuff out there. You just don't know where it's going to go. You just really don't. Never in my wildest imagination would I have thought I'd have a short film now at this point.
I saw that it has been the selection of several film festivals, and I checked out the trailer. It looks really slick and really creepy. It made me very happy.
Yeah, well, that's so good to hear. Amit is an incredible director with such an eye. He is trying to break into film himself.
Mm-hmm.
He spared no expense. He pulled a lot of favors. He did it on a shoestring budget. But I mean, it's such top-notch, high-quality directing. There are people who've been working on The Mandalorian and people who've been working on some of the Avenger movies. And so he has a lot of really great connections. It's something I could have never have done on my own. I'm glad that you said that. It's a great little film for sure.
I look forward to hearing how that project develops. In the meantime, speaking of other projects, you have 2 more novels coming out. Can you give us a little blurb about those?
I do. The first one is Feeders with Timber Ghost Press. Believe that is coming out in October. Really looking forward to this one. This is the book that I put my whole heart and soul into and worked with the agent on. I submitted these to as many publishers as I could. And within a couple months of actually leaving my agent, this is just sort of backwards. I had 2 book deals. One was with, like I said, Timber Ghost, and that's a speculative horror thriller. It has a little bit of the vein of Tremors in it, being an 80s kid.
I like Snakeoid. That's what I like. Graboid. That's it, Graboid. Jesus, Walter. We're going to be sorry you don't give it a name.
It is from the point of view of a kick-ass female protagonist who was a lot of fun to write. This girl by the name of Brent, who's 23, her father's in jail for killing her mother, and one night ends up kidnapping her and putting her sort of into the road trip from hell cross-country to a shelter he built to avoid the creatures in his head called the Feeders that he says are going to erupt at any moment from the earth. The other one, yet to be named, it's more of a psychological thriller, which I'd kind of liken to Misery with a Family. It's a backpacking trip with a father and his 2 daughters, and some unfortunate events that happen during the backpacking trip, and they stumble across a house of a fairly unsound woman who invites them in to help them take shelter from a storm that's broken loose and some of the injuries they've incurred.
As an 80s kid, you had me at Tremors.
Nice. That's such a good movie, right?
Yes, just an all-timer.
It really is.
Broke into the wrong goddamn rec room, didn't you, you bastard?
You had alluded to a horrific real-life Halloween story. Did you want to share that?
Absolutely. I can brighten up this podcast about grief and death and everything with a horrific Halloween story. Back in college, this was freshman year, it was Halloween, and I lost my love for Halloween for a long time after this, but it started out as many great nights do, with cake stands at a party, and I got horrifically drunk with a bunch of friends, and we were going from party to party. And we left an apartment party, and now this will date me some, but a group of guys, and I don't remember any of this, but a group of guys came out and said that I'd stolen some CDs, which I hadn't. I mean, I'm just, when I drink, and I don't much anymore, but back then especially, it's just, I'm happy, right? It's just, I'm goofy, and I didn't take anything, but I think I lipped off to one of them, and he just shoved me, and I fell down, and my tooth actually went right through my lip, came out, got a massive concussion, got taken to the hospital via ambulance. And in the meantime, the 2 guys who I was with, who are from Cortez, I shouldn't even be telling this story, it's so bad, but they had huge, almost like Bowie knives, hunting knives. And they said they were going to go back to the party and find these guys. And so they went back with the knives and forgot why they were there and just actually started drinking again. And they're one of the fiance of one of the guys went and picked them up and took them to the hospital. And one of the guys managed to go into the bathroom, and he puked in the urinal and passed out in the bathroom of the hospital and almost got admitted for alcohol poisoning. And I kid you not, the other one, I don't even know how this happened. This is back in 98 or 99. I woke up to this guy, the other kid. The doctor was there with the surgeon, and they were stitching my lip shut, and he was actually letting this kid stitch my lip in the ER. And I don't even know how this was happening or anything, but that's my first memory, is coming to with my friend stitching my lip shut. So
did he use the Bowie knife to cut the sutures when he was done?
I don't know what happened to the Bowie knives, but I'm glad it didn't go any further than that. But
now, this was Halloween. Were your friends dressed as OR surgeons? Was there a mix-up?
At that point, they were. I don't even remember what we were wearing. All I remember is I remember stumbling back into my dorm, flipping the lights on. I'm just completely soaked in blood, and my roommate waking up going, what the hell, man? And then he saw me, right? And his whole face just goes white.
Happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween to me on that. That was a horrible, horrible night, but thankfully no more situations like that since.
Great story. Thank you for sharing it.
I didn't want to have anything to do with Halloween for probably a good 10 years after that. But having kids, it kind of brings the joy back, and they just get so jazzed up whenever Halloween. I mean, it's months ahead of time. They're looking for their costume and working with mom to find the perfect costume. And it's just so much fun again. It's going back through it again and seeing it for what it is, which is just an awesome time to dress up and go get some candy and kind of be a little bit of a hooligan for the night.
Do you have any favorite local monsters or local spooks?
So growing up on the Four Corners, I grew up right next to the Southern Ute tribe. the reservation there. And there was a lot of stories about skinwalkers growing up. We had a lot of the indigenous kids come to school with me. And so we were always hearing stories that were freaky. And I don't think there's anything scarier to me. That might have honestly somewhat bled into some of my stories too, right? It's like wearing a different skin. It's just freaky as hell.
Yeah, skinwalkers are awesome. Have you ever heard of the Slide Rock Bolter?
I have not.
Really? And you're Colorado born and raised?
The Slide Rock Bolter?
Yeah.
I haven't. I feel ashamed now.
That was my entire goal. So thank you for being on the show, and good night.
And you're on Jeopardy, okay? The answer is Slide Rock Bolter. And this is like $1 million prize, and you have no idea what it is. And then it becomes your shame and your family's shame. Don't worry. And I'm going to learn you about the Slide Rock Bolter.
So, nothing to be ashamed of. Fearsome critters are an extremely small, specific niche in monster lore. They are specific to North America, and they come from the logging camps of the 19th and 20th centuries. Manly Wade Wellman wrote about a bunch of them, but a lot of the fearsome critters are jokes that you would tell to like a greenhorn around a campfire. The Slide Rock Bolter is a giant sort of catfish-like monster, and it hooks on to the top of a mountain slope with its tail, and then when people walk by, it lets go and rockets down the slope on a waterfall of its own drool. It scoops people up in its mouth, and then it rides up to the next peak like a skater in a half pipe, and that is the Slide Rock Bolter.
That is awesome. I don't know if I've ever heard of a better monster than that one. That's incredible. I feel like I need to write a short story with it now.
I think you do. You can actually go out and do some firsthand research out in the hills of Colorado.
Okay. That's easy enough. Take me another 20 years, but I might find one.
It may be the last thing you ever do. What was trick-or-treating like for you growing up?
Yeah, I grew up in a small neighborhood. It was a lot of fun. It was just going out. I probably grew up somewhat similar time to you in that, there were no cell phones. There was a lot less of the helicopter parenting going on. It was a lot of the times just my parents kicking me out of the door with all my friends and us just running around the neighborhood trying to get as much candy as possible. And I'd say every other house, they had decorated up to be, I don't know, something from like Friday the 13th, or they had the monsters, and they had the guy who dresses up and pretends to be a mannequin who stands up and screams at you as you get close. So
classic.
There was also a fair amount. I didn't really participate in this too much, but there was a fair amount of pumpkin smashing as well. So small town.
It is a night of hooliganism, as you were saying. And pumpkins do get smashed. That's why I like to have multiple pumpkins.
You got to have a couple ready, right? So you can put the next one out.
What is one of your favorite horror movies?
That is such a great question. Frailty.
Oh, gosh. Frailty just fucking rips.
It's so good.
So good.
Bill Paxton's so good. I'm glad that you like it, because I've had other people say, they're like, I don't get why you think this movie's so great, but it's just such a good movie.
They were raised to obey their father,
Go do some homework.
to love him, to trust him,
Night, boys. Sleep tight.
until
Wake up. I've got something to tell you.
What's wrong?
There are demons among us. I can see the demons, while other people can't.
One of the things that Frailty does so well is that it gets across that surreal paralysis of being a child, and when things start to go topsy-turvy, but you have no other lifetime to compare it to. Children just accept what's going on. And there's a point where these kids are plunged into a living nightmare in their household, and then they go to school, and then they go back to their house. And it's like, why would you run away? Why would you go tell an adult? It's like, that's not how it works when you're a kid. You're sort of trapped in the bubble of your own young experience. And that part really gave me the willies. Like, I still think about that movie. It is crazy.
Yeah, when you're a kid, the rules are the rules, right? Like your parents, or at least they used to be. I don't know if they are anymore as much, but for sure when I was growing up, you don't question. You do as you're told, and that reality could be whatever a parent makes it. And
have you noticed any peculiar childhood fears in your own daughters? Anything that struck you as profound or just bizarre?
As far as what they experience?
Or in terms of monsters under the bed, things in the closet, maybe they are attached to a certain creepy doll you don't approve?
One of my twins, she went through a period of night terrors. And so she would come in, and I can't give you a specific, like, creature, but she would come into our room in the middle of the night, just screaming.
Oh.
And we couldn't, it's almost like you can't even wake them up. They're just screaming for an hour straight. And it just, you try to get them calmed down, but it's like they're like experience this situation, whatever it is, and you can't snap them out of it. And she finally started to get over that. I mean, we definitely have the kids coming in, banging on the door in the middle of the night, trying to jump in bed with mom and dad because they're freaked out, right? And we're like, there's nothing we can do for you.
Oh,
we can comfort you, and we do let them sleep with us sometimes, but we're like, hey, it's just a nightmare. You got to figure out how to get through this on your own at some point. So without waking up the rest of the family.
I could particularly see that setting off a chain reaction with your other daughters if one is screaming in the middle of the night.
They're freaky. I don't know if you've ever seen like a true night terror, but I mean, it's just crazy. I can't even explain it. I mean, they're just freaking out, and there's nothing you can do about it. Like swinging their arms around, screaming, crying, and it's like they're just in I don't know, some sort of alternate state.
And I know at certain ages, people will be prone to sleepwalk and then they'll grow out of it. Do you think it's part of the brain's development?
When you're sort of like, I guess, warm clay when you're a kid, and your brain's getting molded, and as life sort of works its way into your brain, right? Like, it's probably hard to shut that off. And so the first time you see a scary movie or you get freaked out by something, that is probably playing on repeat often. And then just like you said, I think you put it well, it's probably really hard to shut that off. I mean, shit, man, I still wake up in sweats sometimes, Anything for me, like related to like, demonology or possession or things like that, it really freaks me out. So I can't really blame them either. Dreaming is legit scary at times.
And it's interesting because you think with the media they consume or their daily activities, they'd be just as likely to be running around at night playing soccer in the dark. But it's never that. We don't call it night soccers. We call it night terrors. There's something about that age where your subconscious brain is consumed with terror. And from an evolutionary standpoint, or just being young and powerless, or being young in a world that is traditionally full of large predators and things like that, it's interesting that it's such a terror-rich time of your life.
On top of that, a lot of the times they want it, right? Like, not just my kids in general, they want to be scared. They're always pushing the boundaries to watch that next scary movie. And in fact, I know a librarian at a middle school who says that there's a real need right now for middle grade horror because it flies off the shelves. She can't even keep it on the shelves, but there's not a lot of it.
Yeah.
So there's also something in us that wants to push the boundaries and experience horror, but in a safe venue.
Well, kids also want to touch a hot stove. They're driven to find what their boundaries are, but also they're trying to figure out what the perils of the world are by partaking in horror books and horror movies, telling scary stories to each other. It's a dress rehearsal for the terrors of life. But it is really kind of freaking me out just thinking about night terrors and kids in that time of life. But anyway, I'm falling down a rabbit hole, and I know you got to go. So
fascinating, though.
Yeah. So where can our listeners find more from you?
Yeah, so my website, www.calebstevensauthor.com, and it's Caleb with a C and Stevens with a PH. I list most of my stuff there. You mentioned podcasts. I had a podcast reach out to me called Dr. No Sleep. This is really cool too. Again, just putting your stuff out, but they are putting together an Audible version of my collection that will be coming out probably this spring. So,
oh hell yeah! I listened to their version of The Backwards Man, and it was very well produced. So the whole collection's going to come out like that?
They do a great job, and they've got really cool videos on YouTube. And so I thought, why not? I'm more than happy to help them out, and they're helping me out. So yeah, it'd be really cool. And another thing I don't know if I've seen in Audible is that it'll be basically an Audible book with all the sound effects. Typically when you're listening to Audible, it's just someone reading with inflection. In this case, it'll be, the sort of the whole soundscape, which I think personally is cool. I don't know if it'll annoy readers or not, but I'm going for it.
It depends on the story, but I thought their adaptation of The Backwards Man worked really well, and they had a video to go along with it. I was very impressed.
Yeah, they really do a top-notch job.
Thanks for coming on the show, Caleb. This has been a while in the making.
This was fun. No, this was a good time. But no, this was awesome.
Maybe you can come back on when The Wallpaper Man makes it onto the big screen, or when some of those books are ready to hit the market.
I would absolutely love to do that. Love to come on and just chill out and talk horror again for an hour. This is my idea of a good time.
I'll talk to you soon. You can find the links to follow, subscribe, and contact us in the show notes. You can find Ryan at 20th Century RG with the number 20 on YouTube, and you can find me at jeffccarter.com and hit the link to pick up my collection, We Bleed Orange and Black, 31 fun-sized tales for Halloween. Until next time, stay spooktacular.
Slide rock bolters hang on the peaks, so waiting for the moment to kill what reeks. The biggest of all slides down the slope. When he takes a picture, oh what a dope. Loosening its grip and lifting its claw. It oozes slobber and smacks his jaw. Chet is oblivious, playing with a toy. He thinks he's king, a problem boy. The bolter is bigger than a whale in the ocean, designed to destroy it and make a commotion. Jaws wide open, it slides in their direction. Ready to purge the windy Chet infection. Cleanse from the mountains without a fight. Both of them gone in one single bite.